All right, welcome back to the third season of We All Speak in Poems. Today we have Andrew Tasselmyer on. He is a key member of Hotel Neon and also makes ambient music under his own name, Andrew Tasselmyer. Today in this episode, we're going to be talking about his most recent releases, such as his most recent collaboration with Blurstem. We're going to be talking about releasing under labels versus not releasing under labels, his introduction to music and ambient music in general, and so much more. I really hope you enjoy this one. I was looking back at your personal discography for this episode and realized that you had a surprisingly busy 2023. Specifically, the one I want to talk about first is your album Duets with Chris Bartels as Blurstem. It was one of my favorite of the year. How did that one come about?
Well, thank you. Glad to hear that. Yeah, it was a low-key busy year. I didn't realize. I was looking back at it too, just kind of in retrospect at the end of the year here. But that Duets one, so Chris and I have known each other for a pretty long time at this point. I was a big fan of his Elskavan stuff. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm trying to remember when his first, or when his self-titled Elskavan album came out. It was like probably a decade ago at this point.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah, but it really struck me. And we've kind of run in similar circles. Know a lot of the same people just in this little, ambient ecosystem that we live in. And we got the chance to work together on a Hotel Neon single, actually. Chris asked if we would like to collaborate on a track for an album that was put out, I think, in like 2019 or so. So we actually hadn't worked together on anything until that point. It was just a single track that we did together, and it was a blast. Like, we had a lot of fun. I loved how it sounded. It was received really well, and we kind of just kept in touch after that. So I think once the pandemic hit, everyone was collaborating with everyone. It seemed like everyone had no shortage of time and projects to work on. So we kind of struck up the conversation again, and we're just like, hey, we should do something again. It was a lot of fun. And Chris is he's maybe the only person I've ever met who can exceed the volume of output in terms of ideas and sketches and things like that I do. Because I think I'm a pretty prolific writer. I do it like almost every day as almost like a diaristic kind of thing, just recording ideas and snippets. But he dumped, gigabytes of Dropbox projects and stems on me. And I'm like, holy cow, like, okay, we're going to be able to do something here for sure. So I think at this point, we have, and Duets was one of those that came out of those sessions. Each project that he gave me, or that we work on, typically starts with ideas that he kind of birthed with either piano or guitar or a specific instrument. We have a folder full of synth stems that we still need to work on at this point too. But yeah, we've struck up a really nice kind of working rhythm where every couple of months I'll just go back into Dropbox and pluck out something new that he sent and rework it a little bit and send it over his way. And Duets was the product of those. It was focused specifically on some recordings that he had of his upright piano late at night. And it just worked really well. It was a ton of fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's funny because with Chris as well, like, he sent me so many stems that I've personally never got to. Finally, I've done a couple remixes for him now this year, but I'm still waiting to go back through his files and just find the thing that really resonates.
It's really funny. Yeah, we text all the time, and he'll be like, hey, maybe this will work for LP6.
Yeah.
And like, there's enough to work with to go that far down. Like, quite literally, there's enough to do that. So yeah, because it's a lot of fun.
You guys also came out with something earlier this month in December, Lonesome October, which is out through Past Inside the Present. Is an album coming with that, or is it just a single?
Yeah, so the album, it was released. The first single was Lonesome October, and the whole thing was out on Pass Inside already. So Midnight Letters was the album there, and that was based on guitar for the most part. A lot of sketches and ideas that Chris had for guitar, he put down and then sent over me. So extremely similar process where he just sent me a folder full of stems all based around a loose kind of theme of guitar. Then I took those and reworked them, sent them back to him for mixing and things like that, and it kind of came together really quick. But yeah, that's out on Past Inside. Known those guys for a long time. They're fantastic to work with, and that was out in, I think, October. We did a thing where it's up on Bandcamp for now, just solely there in full, just so that if people, want to buy it and support, it's there to do that. But we'll be trickling out singles on all the streaming platforms. I think one is out there, Lonesome October, and then the rest will come over time. I think the full thing will be out in January, if I'm not mistaken.
Nice.
Yep.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to release music. I've been toying around with the idea of releasing the songs in different ways for each platform in a way.
Yep.
And it's a whole other conversation that I'm sure we can get onto. But I like that it seems like you guys are doing it successfully. Of course, I think I did miss that album, but that might not be on you guys. I think that might be on the label.
But I mean, that's kind of like the nature of things today. And I have thoughts. But it's just it's so tough to release music now. I feel like, the instant you put something out into the world, no matter how hard you've toiled, and how proud you are of it, just the sheer volume of stuff being released all the time. Things that were released a month ago feel old now.
Yeah, literally.
It's tough to get press coverage, and it's tough to get promotion and things like that for, your work in a cycle like that, where it's just so, relentless. The churn is just crazy, which is a good thing. There's a lot of people making music, and a lot of it sounds amazing. It's easier than ever to find music you like, but it's tougher than ever to promote it, for sure.
100%. And yeah, it's interesting because I have the conversation pretty often. You in Hotel Neon came up around the same time that I did. You guys were earlier than I was.
Yeah. We were on Fluid Audio at the same time, right?
Exactly. Yeah. The era of 2016 to 2019, I feel like was the perfect balance of a lot of inspiring music coming out and a lot of people pushing ambient.
Yep.
And in this community without being super oversaturated. And then I guess COVID happened and it's just too much.
Yeah.
But it's also a good thing. I think ultimately it is. But selfishly, I'm can everybody else stop releasing music, please?
I know. It truly is just a totally different environment from when we started. Yeah, we were I think we put our first album out as Hotel Neon in 2012, and it was a domino effect of all these things falling into place where X person heard it, they gave it to Y person, that took us to this label, and it was we hardly had to do any work because it was just chain of chain reaction and word of mouth kind of reaction to the album. And that led to a lot of opportunities where I think if you did that now and just, hope that people heard it, there's zero chance that people are going to hear it. There's so many outlets that have folded. There's so many press people that are no longer doing it. It's just really tough.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's an interesting thing too, because a lot of the people that did just stick through it as artists and as press and blogs and all these people, as long as they stuck through it and are still around, they're still known for being around in that time. So there's at least to me, there's just I guess a respect level there or something. You look highly upon these people. Even though Hotel Neon hasn't made music, I know you guys did the, is it a remaster or redo?
Yeah, a re-recording of our debut, but there's been nothing truly new since New Year's Day of 2021. So we're coming up on 3 years now. Which
is crazy because at least to me, you guys are still up there on the top list of ambient acts. When you think of ambient artists, at least modern ambient, it's Hotel Neon and whoever else,
Yeah.
Which is really cool.
Well, thank you for saying so. I appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. Going back to Duets, it was released on Fluid Audio, which is a cool thing because they had kind of fallen off my radar a little bit until this release. And I know that you've released with, I guess, him quite a few times. How does it feel being back on Fluid?
Oh, it's great. Yeah, they're wonderful. They being Dan and Jess, who run the label, husband-wife team over in the UK. They're just fantastic. The quality of work that they do in preparing the physical packaging, the thought that goes into choosing. It's not just because you could do this kind of stuff where you just throw trinkets into a bag and like zip it up and call it like handmade, or like, you could try to imitate that. And I think a lot of people do, but they are really successful in really thinking through like, how do we want to present this album, really original design and packaging. And it just makes it feel more special. Like there was, labor and work and thought put into this thing that matches what the artists themselves recording the music probably feel like it deserves. So I love what they do. They've been incredibly generous with their time and support of us over the years, and it felt pretty appropriate to go back to them and do this work again. I love working with them, and this was no exception. It came out just like I hoped it would.
For sure. Yeah. And,
Yeah.
they really do need their props, because I look back on my release with them back in 2018, I think,
Yep.
like so fondly, because not only are they generous with just like, they're just generous in general. Like the amount of CDs and stuff that they gave me to sell on my own, I was like, you really don't, I just want one. Like,
I know. Yeah.
and you're letting me,
I feel lucky to get one.
exactly. You're letting me sell this and keep the profit on your work, and also digital profits too. They don't take any digital. I don't know if things have changed since then, but this is my experience with them.
Still the same deal. They sell out to like cover their costs, and then they upload it to their Bandcamp digitally just to have something there. But then after that, it's like you're on your own. You do whatever you want with your music. So it's fantastic.
That's
as an artist.
nuts. Because like,
yeah,
I mean, I maybe I should tell them this, or maybe I shouldn't. But if they did digitally release "You Were Always an Island," the one that I released with them, that's a pretty significant amount of money that they just sort of left on the table there. And like,
yeah,
I should probably go back to them and be like, hey.
That's like the beautiful thing is like I just don't think they care.
That's crazy.
I think they kind of log on to. I think Dan like logs into his email account like once a month or something like that, just to catch up on what he's missed. But other than that, he's like in the shop just preparing another beautiful release on his letterpress.
It's so cool. I really hope that one day they come up with some sort of like book or something going over all the releases that they've done. Oh,
that would be amazing. Yeah. I never thought about that. There's a lot of cool print work that they do that would make for a really nice table book. Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully one day. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. We'll work on that. We'll get in their ear.
For sure. So on to another album that you released this year, Diary. This one was interesting because I think you had even mentioned it on social media that you were putting a much larger emphasis on noise and rhythm. And
yes,
in subtle ways, but it's still very much there. What made you want to sort of go in this direction?
Yeah, great question. This was a really scary release for a lot of reasons. Just like the concept of the Diary album series that Emmanuel is doing with that Sonic Dialogue label. He is asking people to not send finished work. So you're kind of like, you're being really vulnerable and presenting like this stuff is not like polished. It's not finished per se. It's just kind of meant to be a look into like what I'm working on in the studio. And it's literally like opening your diary to show people like, this is kind of what I'm sketching out at the moment. And here's what things are shaping up like, just light mastering and then out the door and into people's ears. So it was a little nerve-wracking in that sense. But also too, because I, like you say, was trying to experiment with some new techniques and some new sounds, intentionally wanted to focus on pulses and rhythm and beats and things like that, and trying to think of ways that the music could just feel more propulsive and alive than, I think a lot of quote unquote ambient music is. And that's by nature, that's fine. But, I think I've just kind of reached a point where I've had my fill of like washy bowls of soup, like reverbed out, kind of droney ambient like that. Like, don't get me wrong, I still listen to it all the time and like I love it, but just like as a creative person working on this stuff, I'm just trying to push myself a little bit and kind of stretch the edges of my comfort zone a little bit further. So I've also just, over the last 3 years, just been diving deeper and deeper into music that sounds like that too. So I've kind of like rewound the clock 20 years and I'm like living deep in like that early 2000s, late 90s kind of glitch, IDM, computer music era where there was a lot more emphasis on rhythm and on kind of like spliced and sliced beats and things like that. So I'm having a ton of fun with it, and this was like a perfect opportunity to, put that out there. Like I said, the concept is all about presenting unfinished work, and so this was like, yeah, I guess I can like open up the, books here and show people what I'm working on in that vein. And as other stuff gets polished, I have a couple things coming out next year that will kind of continue the pattern, but this is kind of a nice way to introduce it to the world.
That's crazy. So when you say that they're unpolished and stuff, like I know that you have the date there. Is there like a time limit where it's like work on this for one day and then just sort of release it as it goes, or?
Yeah, well, it basically, I did have the benefit of, this really fell off the rails like midway through the year. Life just got insanely hectic and I couldn't keep up with it, but I had a really nice streak going where every day I published. I had a literal studio diary. I was like keeping tabs here in a notebook about like ideas I was working on, things I wanted to flesh out, and I was posting on SoundCloud every day for the better part of 4 or 5 months, like just little 30-second, minute long like loops and clips and things like that coming out of my studio that I was working on. So this, fortunately, I had the opportunity to kind of revisit a lot of those things, just dust it off a little bit and put it out for this release. So I had a huge backlog of material to pull from, but you're correct. A lot of it was literally just like a day's work, just not really finished in any real sense. Kind of pulled it out of the hard drive and stuck it on the tape, and that's what's presented. It was nerve-wracking.
That's crazy, because as a listener, I would never know that these aren't polished, that these aren't like done, and it brings up another conversation on like, I there was this whole like, I guess it's a philosophy or something that was going around quite a few years ago on like never doing 100%, like stop at 90 because you'll end up, being better at what you're doing if you don't do these last 10% of whatever, because people won't notice, right, or something like this.
Right.
And it brings up that conversation, which is, I think, really interesting, because some of these tracks like are amazing. They're finished, they're to me. That's really
well, thank you. Yeah, and it's funny you say that, because that was actually a lot of the feedback that I got afterwards was like, it doesn't sound unfinished. It sounds pretty good. Yeah. And I'm like, well, thank you. I mean, I think that's kind of, and I'm really glad that I got to do this album. Like I'm really a big fan of the concept. Like the more and more I think about it, I just really like what Emmanuel is pushing with this series. I think it's a fantastic idea, and it's almost like a form of therapy for me personally, because I hold on to this stuff like so tightly, and I have a tendency to like way overthink what I'm doing and spend too much time in the weeds and like just overthink things. And this was like a perfect excuse to not do that. Yeah. Like intentionally tell myself, you're not gonna there's no finish line on this, so just like put it down and let it go, and we'll see what happens. And I think it's like, in reflection, looking back on how it turned out after doing that, I am pretty proud of it. Like I was like, wow, this like actually does sound pretty good. Like I'm proud of what I did there, and I'm glad I didn't let my brain get in the way of preventing those things from getting out the door. And I'm glad that some of that work from the first half of the year eventually found an audience through that album.
Yeah, for sure. And like it reminds me a lot of what I'm doing with a side project that I have, where because the name Andrew Tasselmyer has weight, the name Alaskan Tapes has weight. You know what I mean? So when you release something,
I would disagree, but it blows my mind to hear you say that, but thank you.
Oh, well, to me it does. Like when I see that there's a new Andrew Tasselmyer release, there's an expectation whether you like it or not, kind of thing. So having an opportunity to sort of just release stuff without thinking about that, because it can come very debilitating, right? And I'm sure you guys have probably felt that as Hotel Neon.
Yep.
It stifles everything. And so I think it's really important for artists to have an outlet where they can just make whatever and release it, because I think releasing music is important, an important part of the process.
Yep.
Without overthinking. Like, don't care if anybody likes it or listens to it. Just like get it out there, get it out of your mind, I guess.
Yep.
And that's what I've been doing with this side project. So it's really interesting. It's just like another version of that. I love that. I'm gonna have to look more into Sonic Dialogue, because this is the first I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's a really great idea. Like I keep saying, their main label, Sonic Dialogue, is focused on collaborative work between two artists.
Okay.
So there's a couple up there already, but this like subdivision of the Sonic Dialogue label, Diary, is specifically focused on the unfinished concepts. So
cool.
Highly recommend checking it out. They're really great.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I was reading some of the process notes on the cassette on the Bandcamp photos, because I don't have the cassette yet.
Yep.
And you seem to, like, especially on this one, I don't know if in general this is the case, but you seem to have been super inspired by the Octatrack. Seems to be like the basis for most of this one. How does that shape the sound for you? Does it make it more, like, does it make it easier to be rhythmic, or it's just the workflow?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. And the process notes they're online too. I'll have to send you a link or give it to you. But the Sonic Dialogue label, they like host a little page for every release, and the stuff is on there, as well as like a Q&A section and things like that. A little like mini interview that they did with me, so you can get a little more insight on the weeds of the work there. But yeah, the Octatrack is, gosh, totally changed my musical way of working. It's definitely my favorite instrument at this point, and I'm specifically using the Mark II version. There's a Mark I and a Mark II, and the second one that was released a couple years ago just took the first one and made it. There's like technical things, like the inputs outputs are a little bit louder on the outputs. It tolerates a louder signal coming in, and there's like better labeling of the buttons and functions and things like that. But it has this mystique as like a kind of like an impenetrable machine that, like, you know, you've got to spend years like toiling away to like learn every detail, and like you can, but it's, to me, like just a very nice way of working. I love the people who know the Electron, that's the company who manufactures it, the Electron way of sequencing, know what I'm talking about, in that it allows you a huge amount of like variation, flexibility, unpredictability. There's a lot of cool tricks you can do with the way that they've set up the machine to kind of do whatever you want. I've written a lot about it on my, I maintain a Substack page where I kind of go into more detail about some of my processes and like offer like breakdowns of how I made certain tracks and things like that. And that's been a lot of fun, but I have to like stop myself sometimes, because when I start to write about the Octatrack, I can get a little carried away. It has definitely shaped my sound over the last 2-3 years or so. And it definitely does help, to answer your question. It definitely does help kind of frame you to think about sound as this, like, sampled sound as like a sequence of events. And some people like that, some people don't. But for me, coming from a floaty, ambient, nebulous kind of world, it's nice to have like some grid lines to follow every now and then, and it helps you do that if you want to. It's been really nice for me.
It's so cool. Yeah, I haven't used one.
Yeah.
I remember when I was looking, I think I was looking for a sampler at the time, and I ended up going with the organelle instead. Yeah, because it's a little bit more streamlined. Like, actually having the keyboard layout makes just more sense.
Another very cool machine.
Oh yeah, my favorite.
Yeah,
pretty much all I use these days. But
I don't blame you.
Yeah, I really need to get my hands on an Octatrack though, because I've heard and seen really, really, really great things.
And it can be like as complicated as you want it to be. Like, I know my friend Marcus, he has one, and he doesn't do anything with the sequencer at all. Like, he never hits the play button. He just uses it as an 8-track looper, asynchronous looper, and you can do that if you want. Like, that's the beauty of the thing. It's just so flexible.
Wow. Yeah,
So no need to overcomplicate it.
this is the interesting thing too with gear in general is like it is marketed as a single purpose, but then using an Octatrack as an asynchronous eight track looper is a
Yeah.
huge thing. Like I don't know if there's
Yeah.
another one. Like when I bought my Roland looper, or sorry, my Boss looper,
Yep.
that's exactly what I was looking for.
Right.
More loops, and
Right.
I couldn't find it because that's probably just not how it's marketed, right?
Yeah. And that's another thing too, is you bring up marketing and it kind of triggered a thought. I'll just stand on my soapbox a little bit too and just say that I also really, really appreciate the Electron kind of ethos behind the products that they make. Like the thing has been in existence for over 10 years at this point. I think it was originally released in 2012 in that first version.
Mm-hmm.
And they still keep it up to date with like regular firmware updates and things like that. And, there's this ongoing debate like in the Electron forums and stuff like that. When's the Mark III come in, and all these other feature requests that people want. But like this thing is still like perfectly, intact, and there's still a lot to explore with it. And so it's been 10 years at this point. I'll probably keep it another 10 years, and I have no desire whatsoever to like, dump it or sell it or move on like I do with a lot of other gear. There's like a clear commitment from the company to keep it relevant, keep it supported. And that's the same with all their stuff too. So I'm not an Electron shill, but like I just love, I love that thinking behind a product where it's not just meant to be this disposable marketing ploy for Instagram. Like
Yeah.
they care about the product and they're going to stand behind it for years.
Well, yeah, and it is frustrating when you get excited about gear, you buy it for like a lot of money, and then 2 months later, Mark II comes out, and your thing is pretty much useless, and you're just like, okay.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's one of the reasons that I didn't really get into my OP1 and I ended up selling it is because the Field came out like 2 months after I bought mine, after waiting 2 years because there was all those issues.
Yeah.
And then I was just demotivated. I was like, well, screw this. I'm done. I'm just going to stick to my organelle.
Yeah. I go deep on a few things. Like my entire studio at this point is an Octatrack, an iPad, and a laptop. And then, obviously the Rhodes keyboard sitting behind me is like one thing.
Yeah.
But that's kind of it. Like I don't have a whole lot of desire to like get, into like collecting scents and stuff like that. I just don't, it's not my thing.
For sure. And yeah, we'll get into the iPad in a little bit because this thing is interesting and it makes me rethink all the gear that I've ever bought in my entire life.
I know how it goes. Trust me.
But before then, I want to talk about a little bit about one of my favorite albums of yours is Piano Frameworks.
Yeah.
And it's inspired a lot of my work, especially lately. Especially like how you've been kind of talking, like getting away from the super washy drone stuff and more into dry ambient, I guess is what I can call it. What was do you remember like the workflow around that album at all? Because especially like the song Voices, like all the tones are like perfect. Like it's the perfect song.
Wow. Well, thank you. That means a lot. Yeah, I do remember a lot of that because that was kind of like the culmination of me realizing, wow, like I love the piano. Like as an instrument, I think the piano is like the perfect launching pad for so much of what I do. It's featured in a lot of my work. I love the piano as like, like a tool, not just for its traditional sound, but I love the decaying tones of hammer strikes. That's why I love the Rhodes piano so much. I was just like thinking at that time, like the piano features in like all my work. So I'm just going to continue to like go deeper on this and like really dive into the piano as an instrument to base an album on. And it's also funny that you bring that album up because I was talking with someone else on a podcast about that album, and they brought up the fact that it sounds, it was funny because I wrote it as almost like a lo-fi tapey kind of thing, but the way that they were describing it was the clarity of sound and like the types of songs that are on there almost felt like hi-fi in a way, where like there are very discernible, like distinct things happening that you can track and trace throughout. And that was really interesting to me because I do remember during the process of writing that album, like I wanted to make it feel not soupy, like not drony, I'm always trying to like stay out of that realm. I think so many other people do it so well, and it's just not where my head is at. So I wanted to make it feel like a little more structured and narrative, and like something you can take on a walk with you, and like kind of tell the story around you as you're like looking at things and like being in the world, rather than like putting on a pair of headphones and drowning it all out. I wanted it to like help tell a potential story. Like, I don't know what the story is, but you know, it could potentially soundtrack someone's life like that. I remember thinking like that a lot during the album. I wanted it to like be a little bit clearer.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, and it comes through completely. Like, like I was saying, there's something. Yeah, when you get rid of the soupiness and you take away drones and a lot of ambient, and you just leave not necessarily melody, but melodic structure. You know, as randomized as it is. You know, and you leave the noise in there and stuff. It becomes this whole other thing, and it's so nice. And that's kind of the realm that I'm in right now as well. Like. You know, like you said, I do still listen to drone music and stuff, but there's so much of it. And like, you know, some people do it extremely well, but others, it's just oversaturated and you've heard it before. Whereas this stuff is always new. And at least to me, just getting into it a little bit.
Definitely.
Like you can do this on a piano 1,000 different ways with 1,000 different pianos. And it, like just the subtleties of noise, I guess, is there, you know? Exactly.
Yeah, and that was all just sampled piano too. Like, I don't have access to a real one, but I wanted to like stretch the limits a little bit and go as deep into piano as a sound source as I could, and try to keep it interesting and varied enough to be, you know, the crux of a whole album like that. It was really fun experiment and had a blast doing it. So I'm glad you resonate with it. That's great to hear.
Of course. Yeah. It's so good. So another thing I wanted to get into was like a little bit of your history before Hotel Neon, before all this stuff. What was your experience with it?
Man, you read my mind, because I was like thinking of bringing it up during my last answer, because it kind of informed a lot of that thought behind like trying to avoid the soupy stuff. But I come from a background of like jazz, funk, kind of jam band sort of stuff. I started out like a lot of people do in elementary school, just picking up a random instrument. That we had the opportunity to pick an instrument in the 5th grade, and I ended up going with trombone because all my friends played trombone and I wanted to be in the trombone section. So it was as simple as that. And that carried me through middle school and high school, played in like jazz bands and stuff like that. Didn't really like take it too seriously, but had a lot of fun with it. And in high school, I ended up joining a band. It was like a classic case of like a bunch of guys sitting around in class, like bored, looking for something to do. And like we all had fairly similar tastes in music. And we ended up forming a band that was like very, like I said, kind of like jam band, funk almost in nature. And I played bass guitar for that band.
Oh, cool.
So I was living in the bass clef all through, you know, elementary, middle, high school. I was playing bass focused instruments, and the bass guitar was a central kind of turning point in my musical career. I picked it up in late middle school and started to play that pretty seriously throughout high school in this band, also in others. And that eventually progressed to a point where, you know, we graduated and we had to go our separate ways, but I learned so much from being in that band. You know, a lot of those guys are just phenomenally talented, and I was just trying to keep up the whole time. One of them is a touring player with like Macklemore and Macy Gray, and you know, like doing the thing. You know, he's like the real deal. The other is a drummer in Nashville. Another one does private guitar lessons on the side. So I was like way out of my depth just trying to keep up with these guys. But they turned me on to a lot of jazz music, a lot of improvised music like that was very melodic and tonal, and you know, had a structure and a roadmap behind it. You know, even something like jazz, you know, there's still riffs you go back to, there's still themes, there's still a very tonal harmonic element, and that kind of really stuck with me. And then eventually in college, my twin brother and I, Mike, we started a post-rock band called The Sound of Rescue. And that was sort of like the early stages of Hotel Neon setting in, where we both really got into like ambient music, atmospheric kind of post-rock stuff. And we took that project, I think, as far as we could take it before, our younger brother was the drummer in that band, and we had to eventually break it up just due to distance and other interests. But it kind of planted the seed for a lot of the ambient work that we did with Hotel Neon. And then Hotel Neon was born out of that around 2012 or so. So it went from this crazy arc of like, classic rock and jazz into like a jam band in high school, into post rock in late high school, early college, into like full on ambient stuff that we're doing with Hotel Neon now. So I don't know how I got here, truth be told. I've followed like a very weird roadmap to get here. But throughout that time, like I've never taken like lessons for any of this stuff. I've just been entirely self-taught. I'm just a very curious person. Like I love to learn new things. And so a lot of this stuff was just kind of like self-driven, self-motivated. Like I heard a sound that I liked, or heard an artist that I liked, and investigated it further, and it kind of led one thing after another to here. I don't know what's next. Maybe in 10 years I'll be like, DJing or something like that. I don't know what's up, but I wouldn't put anything past me. I'm open to new stuff.
Man, that's so cool. I mean, it makes sense, especially coming from like the post-rock side of things with your brothers. And I didn't know you and Michael were twins. That's pretty cool.
Yes. Yep.
Wow.
Identical twins.
Very cool. Do you remember when you first got introduced to ambient music specifically?
I can actually. Yeah. It was so I had been exposed to it prior, I'm sure, like almost inevitably, I'm sure. I had heard it at some point, but the first time I remember being cognizant of it and like recognizing, wow, like this is cool. Like this is something I can explore further, was in my sophomore year of college. I went to the University of Maryland down near DC, and I was just taking a class to like get an extra credit for one semester, just because I could. Like they gave us an optional list of courses that fit with my schedule, and it was a music history class, a contemporary music history class, so focused on the 20th century and the evolution of music from 1920 to I think 1990 was the time frame they were focusing on. So they went from like Stravinsky and like 20s, 30s kind of experimentation into like 50s, 60s, early electronic stuff and things like that. And we eventually got to the work of like John Cage and those guys, but then it progressed to reach Brian Eno at one point. So, I'm one of those guys. I heard, we were like listening to discrete music and music for airports in that class. And that was the first time I had like ever sat down to intentionally focus on it. Like I said, I'm sure I had heard it before that, but like sitting there and listening to it and thinking about like the philosophy behind it and the theory underlying it really made me, appreciate it a whole lot more and think about its potential quite a bit. So that class, like the teacher was phenomenal. I learned so much about music in general, but the takeaway from it for sure was that period that we spent focusing on Eno and his work, and that really led me to explore a lot of that kind of stuff on my own, tried to recreate it and to record it myself, and a lot of it sounded terrible, but it planted the seeds for where I am now for sure.
Man, that's so cool. Yeah, having any sort of class like that, or just somebody to like introduce you to that, regardless of if it's like a professor or a teacher or whatever, is so important. That's how a lot of people hear about it, because like, who's gonna introduce you to Brian Eno? You know what I mean? Unless you're like your dad's really really into it or something.
I totally agree. I mean, that's like, the like word of mouth, just like sharing with friends, like that kind of discovery process to me is so much more rewarding than like, machine driven kind of, I don't know, old man yelling at clouds here a little bit, but like, I really think there's like some real human value in like finding that stuff out for yourself and like and not being just fed things like that. I think it just increases your engagement and your interest level if you have a trusted source coming to you like, hey, check this out.
Yeah.
And there's like emotional weight behind that too. So that's a whole nother tangent, but
yeah, for sure. And then even like when you do become interested enough to fall down that rabbit hole of, similar artists or who they were influenced by, like the connection becomes so much deeper,
Right.
like,
Yep.
Most people's favorite artists aren't other people's favorite artists for the most part, or at least
Right.
most highly acclaimed or something
Right.
like this. And then, you just find yourself too attached to a random composer or something that like, why choose this one,
And like context is everything.
Exactly.
Like the time and
Exactly.
place in which you first hear it and like what you're going through at that point in your life. Like, yeah, we all know the feeling of there are certain critical albums that kind of shape the way we think about things. And that's like the power of music. It can meet you in moments like that. And so when you have a person, introducing you to something at a time that you need it and it like hits you the right way. Yeah, it's much more lasting in its impact.
Exactly. 100%. When you guys sort of started Hotel Neon and stuff, it was a long time before you did any of your solo releases. Did you always have an idea that you were going to do that, or is that something that just came up naturally?
I did. Yeah. I always wanted to. I mean, a lot of like the Hotel Neon stuff is kind of like solo in its origins. And I mean that for all of us, like myself, Mike, Steven, like we all live geographically distant from one another, not too far, but like far enough where we can't like just call each other up and hang out on the weekend. Like there's some effort we have to put into making it happen to meet up. But a lot of the ideas that we create, it starts from a place of like, hey, I was screwing around the studio the other night and like came up with this loop or this idea, and we kind of run with that. And so theoretically, like anything that we start with that band could be a solo work. And so I had always, thought to myself, there's definitely stuff I want to do. I just never had time, and like my interest was in seeing where the band stuff could go. So eventually I found more time, I made more time, and I could work on my own stuff. But yeah, a lot of it was like, it could have been solo stuff to begin with, but eventually found an identity and a place with Hotel Neon instead. So yeah, it's interesting to think about, but I had never like consciously said like, is this an Andrew record or is this a Hotel Neon record? Like I'm never too sure, to be honest with you. I just like go with my gut and see what feels right.
For sure. I guess that brings up an interesting question too, though, is when you're working on a project, I guess you don't really put out like single song projects very often or at all, right? It's always like album based or EP based.
Yep, pretty much. We've done a couple like throughout the years, mostly like as a reason to work with people we want to work with, just as like a fun thing to do, or like as a band, like we give a lot of money to charity. Honestly, we don't really like do this for profit motivation. We donate a lot of what we make to causes, and so like we've found a pretty effective way to raise money for things sometimes is to create a track and put that out. And we've had a lot of success doing that. We haven't done it in a while, but we did it in 2020, I think, with a song called Tortured Shapes. That's still like an integral part of our set list that we play all the time when we play live. But yeah, we tend to stick with the long form album format where it permits.
For sure. And so working, solo wise, how do you put songs together? Is it mostly like a time basis, like these were all made around the same time, or do you typically go in with certain themes and stuff for full albums?
Yeah, that's kind of how it works, is like, so like as a band, we will get together as a group and like rent out an Airbnb or something like that, bring all our gear, just kind of set up shop in a different place together. And we've had a lot of success creating albums this way, where we'll just set up shop away from home, get out of our like typical comfort zone, just kind of sit together and bounce ideas off of each other. Like I'll hear a loop that Steven or Mike made in the room and respond to that. And we're recording everything. Like the tape is constantly running, the digital tape is constantly running. And then we come back from that with like, gigabytes worth of stuff to trim down and fat to eliminate, obviously. But that's typically the genesis of things. We try to the extent possible to start ideas together and to work on them together as much as we can. Like obviously there's a lot of remote stuff that has to happen, but we are pretty diligent and pretty deliberate about making sure that we have time together to work on things like as a trio. Nice. And shape that stuff up. So it typically is all, to answer your question, it typically is all started at the same time. And like themes, motivations, ideas, like all that like underlying stuff we kind of like look back on and think like where was our head at this time? And that's where we come up with like, you know, track names and album titles and like ways we think about mixing all of it and ways we think about affecting all of it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Trying to explain a very difficult process, but
yeah. I know that feeling too, you know. Try to explain something that takes months and months of, you know, mental gymnastics into like a 2-minute segment.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
Is that sort of the reasoning as to why Hotel Neon has been kind of absent, is because you guys have been wanting to sort of be in the same room but haven't been able to find the time?
Yeah, pretty much. That is like the central factor at this point. So Steven's down in Norfolk, Virginia. Mike is in Baltimore. I'm in Philadelphia. Like, if you were to triangulate it, I don't know what the central point in that geography would be. I think it's like southern Delaware, like the beaches of Maryland, like way down in that weird corner of the U.S. map that you look at. But so, I mean, it is like a little tough to get together too often, but also we've all just been like very busy with our life. And I think if I'm being honest with myself, like I am a little wary of like rushing things at this point. Like I still feel like, and especially because we've done two or three tours since the onset of the pandemic. Like I think we did some shows in 2021 and in 2022. We just played one last weekend and then a couple earlier in the year too. And like I still don't, like this is just like a mental block, I guess, but I still don't really get the sense that like most people are like past that phase yet. Like I feel like we're entering a very like weird new phase for music. Mm-hmm. And as a band like us who like prides ourselves on playing a live, like an interesting live show based on the music, like we always write music with the intent to perform it and to play it. And I think the lack of opportunities and the difficulty in performing it has been a pretty big roadblock for us as a group. Like we, you know, thought that we put together like a really great bill last year when we did a tour on the West Coast, and it like ended up being really tough to book shows at a lot of the typical places that we go to. And I just get the sense that a lot of stuff is still sort of unsettled from all the last 3 years of turbulence. And I think it's sort of the result of a lack of certainty about like that landscape and that environment. Like there's no doubt in my mind, we'll obviously make new stuff, and we have a bunch of new stuff that we need to polish up. But at the same time, like I'm not in like a huge hurry to get it out there in this environment. Like we were talking about before, it's so hard to promote things. Yeah. It still doesn't really feel great on like the live show portion of things. Like people, I think, are still kind of wary to head out and go to shows and stuff like that. I've definitely seen like a dip in the typical attendance at things that I've been to. So yeah, it just feels a little tough right now. Like, I don't know. I feel like we're just we're biding our time, like thinking about what we want to do, and like we're going to make it count when it happens.
For sure. I love that. Yeah. I don't think, as much as I think a lot of fans want new music all the time, really. Yeah. When you guys do drop something new, it's going to be a big splash. So might as well make the whole landscape, work for you, because it's interesting. I never even considered that. Like, even though everything is technically back, even me and Chantel, like before the pandemic, we were going to shows at least once every couple months.
Same. Yeah.
And now I've been to maybe 2 since in the last 3 years, you know?
Man, it's so hard.
Yeah.
Like this is a whole nother tangent we could go down, but like I'll keep it short. It does still just feel very weird. Like it's tough to promote digital music.
Yeah.
Given, the volume of it, and it's hard to stand out, but it is still tough to promote shows right now. A lot of venues have shut down. A lot of like familiar faces are gone. Just a lot of turnover, a lot of change, a lot of new things that still have to be figured out, like at the local level for a band like of our size playing the kinds of places that we play. It's just sort of an uncertain environment to be stepping into right now.
100%. Yeah. Something else that I'm pretty interested in talking with other artists about are labels in general. Like there's a lot of conversation on if you even need a label, what's the point of them now. But as somebody like you who has released on like some of the most highly respected ambient labels, like Lapse, like Fluid Audio, like Seal.
Been really fortunate. Yeah. Yeah.
How do you feel about this whole conversation? Do you still think that there's like a benefit?
Yeah, I honestly, I think there's more of a benefit than ever.
Okay.
I will say that because I think that in that environment that we started the conversation with and that we just touched on now, like where things are so crowded and so difficult to stand out, I personally find myself, and I know I'm not alone in this, I've talked to people about it too, but I personally find myself reverting back to like trusted sources that I know. And those trusted sources for me are like labels that I know reliably curate like quality sound and like have a vision and like thought and intention behind what they do. So I'm thinking of labels like 12K and Lapse and Icky and Sonic Dialogue, like we were talking about before. Fluid Audio is one. Home Normal is another. Like I have a whole mental like roster of labels in my head. That DAW just came to mind. Fantastic label out of Belgium. But like there are all these places that just curate exceptionally well, and I trust them to like do a lot of the filtering, honestly. Like it goes back to that conversation too about like having a friend introduce you to music. It just feels like it's more meaningful and more relevant, for lack of a better term. I trust those guys to put music in front of me, those guys being the labels I'm talking about. Like they're going to put music in front of me that is like of high quality, that has like, a trustworthiness to it, I guess you could say. And so I think personally, even though anyone can upload stuff and anyone can like put things out there, and like you don't like, really need a label. You can just pay a publicist to like put it on the front page of Stereo Gum or like whatever, magazine or press thing you want to, reach out to, The Wire, things like that. Like I personally just trust these labels and like that little like ecosystem of people around it to show me the way, more so than just kind of left to my own devices clicking aimlessly through Spotify or Apple Music or whatever, trying to find similar artists that are determined by a algorithm or what have you. Like that's fine. Like it works sometimes, but I would just rather follow like the output of a label and see what they're presenting and what their vision is and see who they trust. And that kind of opens doors in a little bit of a different way than I think this operating environment tells us to think. So I think a label is still hugely valuable to be associated with it, to be promoted by it, to be included in like that aesthetic or like that presentation, to me is still hugely valuable.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, 2 labels that always come to my mind that are like always doing it right because of, the curation, like they don't let bad sounding music come out of their label.
There's a standard that you kind of expect of them.
That's 12K and DAO for me. Every single time something comes out, I try to listen to it because I know I'll like it.
Instant purchase. It's like I have like a list of labels that just like I buy stuff blind just because I know I'm gonna like it.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's a really interesting conversation. There's so many sides to it, and a lot of people are super passionate about it. It's always a fun conversation, I think.
And I'm not like by all means, like DIY, like do it yourself, like have at it for sure. Like if you don't want to go through that trouble, then don't. Like you don't have to. But I personally just I value that a little more. I like to like work with people and like make connections to make an album happen like that.
So I know that you do also self-release. How do you personally like choose whether or not to be on a label or self-release certain albums?
Yeah, it's a great question. Typically with a label release, like I will put a little bit of thought prior to starting things about like how am I feeling at this point in time? Like what kind of music do I want to write? And I honestly start to think of like I don't pigeonhole myself in doing this. Like I'm not trying to like lock myself in a lane, but as stuff starts to emerge and ideas start to like, come together and I can like hear what an album is starting to sound like, then I'll start to think to myself like, what label might be able to help with this or who would I want to share this with? I do think about that a little bit. Like I said, it doesn't determine like the path that I take necessarily, but it does cross my mind like could this be something that a Fluid would release or something like that. But I do think that generally speaking, like if I can't think right away about that or like nothing like obvious comes to mind in terms of like the overall aesthetic of the album or like what it sounds like, or if I just am not like that hung up on it, honestly, I'll put it on my own Bandcamp. And
Nice.
I do have like a good working rhythm established at this point where for all of my like studio experiments, I'll like film it. I try to document as detailed as I can, like the process behind it. So I'll, like either film it or write about it on Substack, share that with people who follow me on Bandcamp. Like I have a subscription on Bandcamp and people get exclusive releases for that. I think I've put out like probably 12 or 13 like little EPs this year alone.
Oh,
so
wow.
I've stayed pretty busy in that sense. But yeah, if like I'm just feeling like this is just something I want to do for fun and like I'm just going to let myself go and like not overthink it and kind of go with the flow here, like that typically finds its way into a self-release on my Bandcamp for subscription. And then it's something that I can like make more meaningful and make more fun by writing in depth about it on Substack and then detailing the process on YouTube. Like there are all kinds of ways that all these platforms can work together. And I think I'm still trying to figure it out 100%, but I have a pretty clear process at this point where I'll share an idea on YouTube or SoundCloud, I'll write about it on Substack, and then I'll share that with subscribers on Bandcamp. Like it's kind of a nice virtuous circle of like people who are super into the music and like really want to support. I deeply, deeply appreciate that. And this is a nice way to like reward that attention with like some pretty fairly like exclusive kind of content.
I love that you're doing the whole Substack thing too, like actually putting your thoughts behind these things into words, like readable words.
I have a ton of fun with it.
It's so cool. For so long I've thought about doing something like this, but I also know it's a ton of work. Like you probably put so much time into this. It's cool.
It's a lot of work. I was talking about this with someone. Yeah. I mean, for every post that goes up there, like every article that I write about things, and I do this because like this is how I learned to play music. Like this is, like I said before, I'm totally self-taught. Like I learned what I saw, and I saw people making the kind of stuff that I wanted to make too. And so I studied their technique. And so I'm trying to make this more accessible for people. Like, what the hell is he doing with an iPad on stage? Like what is he pointing at and clicking on? Like,
yeah, I
want to make that visible. So for every post that I throw up there, like I'm hoping that it's useful and informative. And so I do spend a lot of time on that. It's probably like 8 to 12 hours of, effort behind every post. And I get a lot out of it. Like it makes me think about what I'm doing and, helps to recenter, like, why am I doing this in my brain a little bit more. So I've, like I said, I've had a ton of fun with it, and I'm really glad that the platform exists. It's been a lot of fun to write there.
For sure. Yeah. And like the way that you do sort of teach things is super clear. Did you always have like a knack for teaching, or is this just something you've developed?
I think this comes out of my day job. So like in my day job, I work in supply chain and logistics, but specifically on process improvement. So I am quite literally like paid and trained to break down a workflow or a process or a product and like figure out how do we make this better? How do we make it more efficient? And so I think like from that, I've had the opportunity to do a lot of like work similar to that in like professional settings.
Yeah.
And so I think that has definitely carried over into the music too, because I think like that. I just like I see a process and I see how I would try to explain it. And I try to explain complex things as simply as possible.
For sure. Yeah, and it makes sense, total sense, because
Yeah,
you're really good at it. And like to get finally into the iPad, this brings us right into it, because when I was sort of researching for this episode and trying to come up with questions and stuff, your most recent YouTube video, like outlining how you use the iPad for live performance and stuff, I ended up just watching the whole thing, like, and forgetting what I was doing, because it was so intriguing.
Awesome.
And I was like, man, not to harp on a company, but I just got the GR1, the granular synth, the hardware one. It's so sick.
Oh, I'm jealous.
So sick.
I'm jealous.
But at the same time, I really just wish I bought an iPad and got sampler. It's like way better, and you can use it with your fingers, and you can see everything, and you can easily bring it to live situations.
Well, not better, but different.
Different.
Yeah.
Yes, not better. Yes, because the GR1 is really great. It's really fun,
but better.
For sure. And so like
I'm just messing with you.
So when did you sort of get into the iPad? Like, who taught you? Because there's not really much on this.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've actually never thought about it. I'm trying to think back here. I think I do remember specifically there was a very specific use case, to bring up a scrummy professional business word. There was a use case and like a product that we were trying to develop for our 2018 West Coast tour that we did with Hotel Neon, where we had written like pretty complicated, complex songs that there wasn't an easy way to reproduce a lot of the textures that were made on the album, just because they were heavily processed. I mean, there was no, I don't think I even saved a lot of like the templates that we were using when we got together to jam on those songs. And so they were kind of lost in the digital ether. When we wanted to tour the album, we were thinking to ourselves, like, how the hell are we going to play this stuff live? And so a lot of it came back to like, well, how do we don't want to just click on stuff and like click tracks and like make like backing tracks like play underneath it. Like that's not any fun for us. It's not fun for the audience. Like there still needs to be like a performative aspect to it. And so it was back then, like I think like the end of 2017, early 2018, when we were making this album. It's called Means of Knowing, and we were going to tour it on the West Coast. We were thinking like there's got to be a way to make this more fun to play live rather than just creating backing tracks. So I think it was at that point I was kind of just like browsing the internet, like Googling basically like how do I, what sampler programs are out there, what kind of like tools could we possibly use to bring this album to life. And that's when Sampler was brought to my attention. I had never used it before that point, but I had a crappy old iPad mini, like the first generation iPad mini, and it worked like a charm. Like it was incredible. It was so fun to play. I could load samples that we used from our literal recording sessions on there, and you know how it works. Like it's very gestural, like the whole thing is visual. It's a fun way to interact with samples, more fun than any other sampler I think that exists in the digital domain. But it was like a perfect way to play those songs. And so I ended up using the iPad mini on that tour that we did in 2018. We played on the West Coast with Marcus Fisher and Benoit Pilard.
Oh, wow.
And that was like a crux of the set, was the iPad, because it was playing like all these impossible to play stems and samples live, but in a interesting way. Like we had freedom to control them and freedom to shape them and not just click play on a playhead and a DAW. We weren't just triggering tracks in Ableton Live or something like that. And so from then on, it kind of like dawned on me, like there's real potential in this ecosystem, the iOS ecosystem. And just from there, like the quality and like pace of development has been insane. I mean, you can buy any off-the-shelf iPad. You can buy any ancient iPad if you wanted to, and it'll still run. Like the Fab Filter plugins are on there. Eventide has all their plugins on there. All the unfiltered audio plugins are on iPad and even iPhone if you want to. But like the quality of stuff that's being developed and released on a consistent basis is just like phenomenal. So that's the genesis of it, was like that tour and just finding a way to like make it fun and make it performative. That led me to Sampler, and that was just a whole, rabbit hole from there. And like you said, a lot of it was kind of self-taught after that. Like there wasn't any real reference point to use at that point. And so that is kind of why I do what I do. Like I want people to know about this stuff and like save your money. Like you don't have to spend a boatload of money to make good music. Like you can do this stuff anywhere. I make music on the train on my way into work on my iPad, and it's just as good, just as high quality as anything I do on a laptop.
Oh man, I gotta get myself one. I mean, that's the downside of not being an Apple person, is like that's probably the reason I've never used it, is because I just don't have an iPad laying around.
And that's like the unfortunate part of it. Yeah, it's like it is a little locked. You do have to get a little bit locked into the Apple stuff, which is a shame.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very exciting.
Yeah, especially when, the OP1 costs $2,000, the Organelle costs $700, the GR1 costs $1,000. Replace any of those with an iPad and you're probably good to go. You know what I mean?
I've built like and not even like just instruments and plugins, but like even just utility things like mixers. Like AUM is the program I use when I play live. It's like a DAW plugin host. It's like the mixer of my dreams. I can like, touch the screen and mix anything I want, send it to however many mix buses I want, however many outboard sends I want. Like it's limitless. It's phenomenal. I love it.
One question I had about Sampler in general is there a record button where you can just record through the iPad mic, or do you have to load samples?
Yes, there is.
There is. Okay.
Yeah, you can sample from the iPad mic.
This is an easy sell. Like I gotta get one. I've been toying around with it for like a year now, and I don't know why I can't just put my foot down.
It's like amazing. And even on your like phone, like if you take a recording on your phone, like it's extremely easy. And I'm speaking from an Apple perspective, so apologies for Android users, but like on the iPhone, if you use your voice notes app, like record whatever you want, then just airdrop it over to your iPad and it's there instantly. You open up audio share on iPad and like trim your sample or whatever and load it in the sampler. Like it no wires ever. Like you don't ever have to use a cable of any kind to make this stuff happen. It's so easy.
I gotta get it. I mean, even with Android, like, there's Dropbox and stuff that you can get away with.
Yeah. And you can import directly from Dropbox on Sampler.
Exactly.
Like there's a whole function just for that. Yep.
Man, that's awesome. So
yeah,
with that integrated into like a key part of your creation workflow, what does your like workspace look like? Are you concerned with like acoustic treatment and like actual studio stuff, or are you just sort of in an office?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. Like I do care. At the same time, like I don't kid myself that I need a perfect environment to do my work. Like I leave that to the mastering engineers that we work with. Yeah. Like they have, treated spaces and all that stuff. And I do want things to sound good. Like I know about acoustic theory, and like I have a couple, treatments here in the studio that I'm in right now, but it also doubles as my office when I work from home for my day job. I record probably half the music I make outside of this space. So as much as I care and I appreciate quality and like effective treatment and all that stuff, it's not like a end all be all for me.
Yeah.
I have learned to optimize what I can. Like I have really nice Neumann speakers that have DSP calibration, and like they fit my room incredibly well. I mean, the technology is like, it blows my mind every time I like fire it up. It's just unbelievable how accurate and precise it is. But not that I use that stuff as a crutch, but I mean, it frees me up to think less about that and more about like how I'm working otherwise. And like I'll find ways to listen to it accurately. I don't doubt my ability in that realm, but I'm also not going to spend like a ton of money and a ton of time to make this like a perfect space, because just the pace of change in my life right now is crazy. So
For sure.
with 2 kids, and like we just moved here a year ago, and it's like it's never going to be perfect. So I'm not going to kid myself.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny thing, right? Like a lot of other people are obsessed with gear and stuff, and I am too. But another thing that I always go down the rabbit hole for is like acoustic treatment, and I'm like, oh, maybe I need like some tube absorbers or like diffractors or diffusers, and I'm like,
yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. And my wife is very handy, so she's like, I don't buy a lot of the stuff. She typically makes it. Like
Sick.
Bought the rock wool like insulation and like made our own sound panels, and like so a lot of like the absorption that I have was just made by her. It's awesome.
Nice. Yeah, I kick myself for not just making my panels myself. I actually bought the Auralex stuff. I don't know why I did.
Yes.
I know I can make panels.
It works though. Like that's another thing. It's just like whatever works, you do what you got to do.
Exactly. Oh man, that's amazing. So upcoming in 2024, what do you have planned? Or do you have anything like super exciting that you want to sort of shout out?
I think there is something on January 30th, I think is the release date that we're targeting right now. But I have an album coming out on the label Mystery Circles. They're a fantastic imprint out of Las Vegas. Dave is a super good guy, but he's put stuff out by like Christopher King from This'll Destroy You. All his solo work as Symbols on that label. Blank Forms is on that label. Tyler is a fantastic like tape loop wizard who's released on that label. But I have an album coming out through Mystery Circles on January 30th. It's sort of an extension of the stuff that was on Diary. Very glitchy, rhythmic, I don't know how to describe it. Like interesting, percussive, kind of propulsive ambient stuff. That'll be coming out on tape and CD through them at the end of January. And then the rest of the year, nothing is like definitive, but I am talking with 2 or 3 different labels about putting stuff out with them. And I've got to get my act together and just like pull together a lot of the in progress stuff I have going on. So there will no doubt be more. It's all kind of waiting in the wings at this point. But the first thing to target is that January 30th thing. And then obviously all the shows that will likely play, there's stuff in the works for that, both as Hotel Neon as well as my own stuff.
Nice. Have you played many shows as like Andrew Tasselmyer?
I've only played like a handful, like 2 or 3. Because another complicating factor is I'm also very interested in developing some other work that I have going on with just Mike, my twin brother. We have a side project called Gray Acres. And we have been working on stuff too. So a lot of my solo attention has been a little bit diverted that way to develop some stuff that we have in progress. And we've performed together a bit. We're hoping to perform more in 2024 as well.
Sick. I didn't know about that. I didn't know about Gray Acres.
Yeah.
I'll check it out.
There's a long hallway of doors you can go down in my musical life. So
sure.
that's one of them.
Amazing, man. Well, I'm really excited about your solo stuff because, even in that video that I watched, like just the performance of that track, I was like, this could be it. Obviously Steven and Mike had a lot in terms of guitar and other stuff that they do. But I was like, wow, like this is really sick. Super excited.
Thank you. I'm really excited about that too. I think I'm happy with sort of the lane that I've carved out for myself and where I'm heading at this point.
Amazing. Well, for the listeners, if you've made it this far, you might as well subscribe to Andrew on Substack and Bandcamp and YouTube. And
All the things. Yep.
Check out his music and stuff. I really appreciate you coming on this, man, honestly.
Thank you for having me, Brady. Yeah, real pleasure to talk with you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of We All Speak in Poems. I hope you enjoyed this episode. This was the first one back after a few months break, and we're going to be getting back into it this season with a bunch of new, really great guests, in my opinion. We have a lot of them slated for recording, and we're going to be releasing them about every other week or so. So I hope you're going to tune in, and I hope you enjoyed them, and we'll see you in the next one.